Welcome back to the channel. If you're new, please make sure to like, subscribe, and always comment down below. New Yorkers love to hate on the subway system, whether it would be the hot, dirty, muggy train stations, the increase in fares, the delays, the homelessness. There are plenty of reasons why people might hate the subway. Maybe it's the increase in crime. However, New Yorkers tend to take for granted how great the New York City subway truly is. Not only can you catch a subway on almost any line in the middle of the night, there's also plenty of express trains, and you can get through many boroughs. You can transfer several times for only $2.75. It's super fast and convenient, and there are several lines that connect the subway system. Today I'm going to be ranking the subway lines through a tier list. The shuttle lines and the Staten Island Railroad do not count because they are not technically part of the subway system and they're not really train lines. So I'm not going to be including those. I'm going to be ranking all the lines from ones that I think are good to ones I think are bad. So sit back, relax, and let's look at the New York City subway. Our first line is the 1 train. The 1 train goes from Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx to Lower Manhattan and connects very important areas along the west side. It also connects Penn Station, Times Square, and the World Trade Center. Its rolling stock are the R62 cars, which are my least favorite cars in the system, which definitely brings this line down in my opinion. However, its important connections are great. It doesn't really make a lot of curves to connect other stations, unfortunately. However, it is one of the faster lines in the system for sure. But I'm just not a huge fan of this line. It's not significant to me. It doesn't really stick out, so I'm going to put it in the C category. Maybe I should have put it higher, but overall, this is just my ranking for the 1 train. It's not my favorite. Everyone's opinion about the subway lines are totally different, so I apologize, but I'm going to put the 1 train in the C category. At least it runs late nights. Our next train is the 2 line. The 2 train goes from Wakefield in the Bronx to Flatbush in Brooklyn. It runs late night service and uses the R62 cars. Besides the R62 cars, this is a great line. It connects a large portion of Bronx and Brooklyn and connects Manhattan. It's a very accessible line, and I think that it is one of the best in the system. Therefore, I'm going to put it a little bit higher than the 1 train. I'm going to put it in the A category because I really think it is a great line. Again, they do use the R62 cars, which are not my favorite, but I can't really knock the line for that. Its convenience is what puts it so high. Our last red line is the 3 train. The 3 train goes from Washington Heights in Upper Manhattan to New Lots Avenue in Brooklyn. Just like the other trains, they use the R62s and they run late night service. I'm not going to lie, it's not my favorite train. It's definitely not the worst. It could connect more of the city, like going to the Bronx, but it's not urgent. I think it's okay with, honestly, going in the middle, in my opinion. Between the R62s, it's just not my favorite. But just because of the car, I can't hate it. You have to look more at the convenience, the fact that they run late night service, and stuff like that. So that's something you have to consider, not just the rolling stock that each line uses. So keep that in mind. Our next line is the 4 train. The 4 train goes from the Bronx to New Lots Avenue in Brooklyn. It runs late night service and is express through Manhattan. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. This is my favorite line, okay? The fact that it connects both the Bronx and Brooklyn and the fact that it runs express through Manhattan is just amazing within itself. It's very convenient for connecting between the Bronx and Brooklyn. The rolling stock is the R142 cars, which are some of my favorite in the system. Again, just the sheer convenience of connecting between the Bronx and Brooklyn using the 4 train is really awesome. And that within itself puts this line towards the top. Our next line is the 5 train. The 5 train goes from the East Bronx to Flatbush in Brooklyn. It does not run late night service and uses the R142 cars. The fact that this line doesn't run late night service, I think, is a problem and needs to be changed. But overall, I'm not going to knock them for that, okay? The fact that it connects so much of the Bronx to Brooklyn is a great thing. It's not as convenient as the 4 train, but I think if you're just traveling in between the Bronx or Brooklyn, this is a great option. Okay, the R142s are also a really good factor. I just love the green lines. The last green line is the 6 train. The 6 train goes from Pelham Bay Park in the Bronx to the Brooklyn Bridge train station. It runs late night service and uses the R62 cars. I'm not going to put this train at the top because it does not connect Brooklyn and it does not use my favorite cars in the system. Unfortunately, it still uses R62s. However, it is still a great line because of it connecting Pelham Bay Park, which I think is a great connection, and how much it actually goes through the Bronx. So therefore, I'm going to put it in the A tier. Our next line is the 7 train. The 7 train goes from Hudson Yards in Manhattan to Flushing, Queens. The fact that it runs crosstown service is a great thing within itself, but my favorite thing about this line is its connections to some of the largest and most diverse neighborhoods in Queens, and in New York City for that matter. Their rolling stock are the R188 trains. They run late night service, and one of the great things about this line is how most of it is elevated, and once you go over the Manhattan Bridge, it is one of the most beautiful lines, okay? The Hudson Yards station is also one of the nicest train stations in New York City. This is overall one of my favorite lines, therefore it is going in the S tier. Our next line is the A train. The A train goes from Upper Manhattan to Far Rockaway in Queens. Okay, and again, this is one of my favorite lines, okay? First off, it is the longest train in the system, okay? And when you're going over into the Rockaways, you go on like this little island in the Jamaica Bay. It is absolutely gorgeous. Pretty much the most scenic sight on the New York City subway. Okay, it runs the R46 trains, which are some of the older trains in the system and I think need to be retired. But they are also running the new R211 cars. It's the only line that is using the R211s as of right now. This line also connects Penn Station, and I think therefore is one of the best lines in the system. Okay, just because of the sheer size of it and the convenience of the A train. It's going in the S tier. Our next line is the B train. The B train goes from Harlem to Brighton Beach in Brooklyn. And I'm going to say this is one of my least favorite lines in the system. It doesn't run late night service. It also does not run weekend service, okay? It is not a very frequent line. And in addition to that, they use the R68 cars, which are some of my least favorite in the system. These cars are old and need to be retired. There's really no redeeming factors to the B train. I'm going to put it in the C tier, right next to the 1 train. I would say it's actually worse than the 1 train. Our next line is the C train. The C train goes from Upper Manhattan to Cypress Hills in Brooklyn. It does not run late night service, and the rolling stock are the R46 and R179 cars. This line is decent because it connects some very important parts of the city, especially between Brooklyn and Manhattan. Unfortunately, it doesn't run late night service, but again, I can't knock them on that too hard, so I'm going to put them in the A tier. Our next line is the D train. The D train goes from the Bronx to Coney Island. It runs late night service and uses the R68 cars. My only knock for this line is the fact that they use the R68 cars. However, it connects Yankee Stadium, goes through Coney Island, and runs express. So I really can't complain about this line. All right, I think it's a great line. It's not the best in the system, but definitely not the worst. So I'm going to put it right next to the 3 train in the mid tier. Our next line is the E train. The E train goes from the World Trade Center to Jamaica, Queens. It uses the R160 cars and runs late night service. The E train is a great train in my opinion, not only because it connects the World Trade Center, but the fact that it connects Jamaica as well, and goes through some of the largest neighborhoods in New York City. There's really nothing bad about this line. I mean, maybe it could be extended a little bit more, but it's not really urgent and doesn't need to happen right now. Maybe that's a plan for in the future. We'll see. I'm going to put it in the A tier though, right next to the C train. I would actually say it's better than the C train. Our next line is the F train. The F train goes from Jamaica, Queens into Manhattan and then into Coney Island in Brooklyn. All right, it uses the R160 cars and runs late night service. Okay, I'm not going to say it's my favorite line, but it's definitely not my least favorite line, okay? It connects some very important neighborhoods. It doesn't really need to go to Manhattan, but I still think that adds some convenience for Manhattan riders. So therefore, I don't really know where to put it. I think I'm going to put it, honestly, right next to the D train. I think it's a good train overall. Our next line is the G train. The G train goes from Flatbush, Brooklyn to Long Island City in Queens. It runs late night service and uses the R160 cars. I'm going to say this, the G train is great. It's the only train in the system that does not go to Manhattan, and you may think that that's not a good idea, but all the other lines go into Manhattan, and it's hard to get in between Brooklyn and Queens if you want to go by subway, and I think the G train in that case is very, very convenient. Okay, there are some draws to the G train though. It only runs a few cars, and the problem with it is it doesn't go far into Queens, okay? There's only a few station stops in Queens. The rest just goes through Brooklyn. So it definitely needs to be extended until they build the Interborough Express. But I have to give credit to the MTA for trying. So I'm going to put it in the A tier, right next to the E train. Our next line is the J train. The J train goes from Lower Manhattan to Jamaica, Queens. It runs late night service and uses the R160 and the R179 cars. Okay, I love the rolling stock on this line. It's pretty much the best in the subway system. It's not a really long line and should probably be extended to maybe Penn Station or even Grand Central, but knowing the MTA, that'll probably never happen. It's definitely not the best subway system in the city, and it does go to some pretty horrible stations like Chambers Street and Bowery, which are some of the most dirty, disgusting, grimy stations in the city. But the J train's not bad. I'm going to put it right in the B category, right next to the F line. Pretty mid-tier. It's not a long line, but it does have good rolling stock. Our next line is the L train. The L train goes from 8th Avenue in Manhattan to the Canarsie neighborhood in Brooklyn. It runs late night service and uses the R143 and R160 cars. Great rolling stock in my opinion. The L line is definitely one of the shortest lines in the system. However, it connects many parts of Brooklyn, and I think therefore can be convenient if you are traveling within Brooklyn. It doesn't go through a lot of Manhattan, but the sheer amount of stations it has in Brooklyn I think is good. Okay, it's very convenient. I'm going to put it right next to the J train. Our next line is the M train. The M train goes from Rego Park in Queens, goes out into Manhattan, and then goes back into Ridgewood, Queens. It does not run late night service, and it uses the R160 cars. You see, here is the problem with this line, okay? It starts in Queens and ends in Queens, but you have to go through Manhattan. If you look at this line on a map, it is extremely inconvenient, okay? There is no reason why this line needs to go to Manhattan. Okay, it is a complete waste of time. If you are connecting between Rego Park and Ridgewood, you're better off taking a bus because this line will take well over an hour simply because it goes into Manhattan. There is no reason for this line to go into Manhattan, and I think it is very inconvenient. I'm going to put this line in the D category. I'm really not a fan of the M train. Our next line is the N train. The N train goes from Astoria, Queens, into Manhattan, and then into Coney Island in Brooklyn. It runs late night service and has the R46 and R68 cars. It has some of the oldest rolling stock in the city, which I think needs to be changed in the future years, but I still think that this is a decent enough line. It connects important areas like Astoria and Coney Island and Manhattan as well. It's not my favorite line. I can't put it too high, but overall, it's pretty average. They need to change the rolling stock in my opinion. But overall, I'm going to put it right next to the L train. Pretty mid-tier, to be honest. Our next line is the Q train. The Q train goes from the Upper East Side of Manhattan to Coney Island in Brooklyn. It runs late night service, and just like the N train, it uses the R46 and R68 cars. It's basically a N train that does not go to Queens. I'm not a huge fan of this line. It is part of the 2nd Avenue subway, which is a project that has taken decades due to bureaucracy and the fact that getting anything done in New York City takes a very long time. I can't knock the line for that, but I'm not really a huge fan of the 2nd Avenue subway. It doesn't go far enough into Manhattan. Our next line is the W train. The W train goes from the Upper East Side to Coney Island. It runs late night service and uses the R46 and R68 cars. Okay, this is basically just the Q train. Okay, there's not really much need for this train. Unless I'm wrong, I'm just gonna put this in right next to the Q train because it's basically the same thing. And our last line is the Z train. The Z train is the most useless line in the system. All it does is follow the J train, okay? There's really no need for it. It's not frequent, it's not used a lot, it's really just a waste of a subway line. I'm going to put it in the D category. This is my least favorite subway line in the city. So that is my tier list of the New York City subway. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Tell me your opinion. Do you agree with this list? Maybe would you change it? Tell me what your favorite and least favorite lines are. Please like, subscribe, and God bless all you guys.